Hey everyone, we have Adam Miner back in the Agile Coach podcast. Probably a lot of you have heard his podcast with Vivek last time, and we got a lot of good feedback. There were a lot of people that listened to it before their interviews, some people that are already in their role right now, and got a lot of value out of the podcast. So we wanted to invite you back and just kind of continue where you guys maybe left off last time. So yeah, this session I just really want to just have a conversation between two fellow agilists and just kind of pick your brain on what you've been doing and how have you really been excelling as a Scrum Master in your role. So yeah, just to really reintroduce Adam a little bit, if you guys are listening to him for the first time. I know Adam comes from an athletic background, degree in biology, worked in finance for a little bit, and found his way towards Scrum Master in the Agile space. I think really the various background that you come from, Adam, really gives you a space to step back and see things from different perspective, and really sets you apart from a lot of the Scrum Masters that I've seen out there in the industry. So yeah, thank you for coming back. Maybe we can just kind of start with, what do you like about being a Scrum Master?
Yeah, I think just at like a core level, the values and the principles really spoke to me.
Mm,
Coming from a background in athletics and having worked in some leadership roles in undergrad, just, being involved in extracurriculars, I realized pretty early on, and I think in my professional life, that collaboration and communication were pretty powerful.
mm,
And then as I started to be exposed to Agile in 2015 and 2016, this idea of being a servant leader, allowing teams to be self-organizing, making them make their own decisions, holding them accountable to their decisions. Even more powerful than that, the ability and the encouragement to be transparent in communication
mm,
was something that I saw in athletics, but I didn't always see it professionally.
right.
And I think that a lot of times, teams and organizations don't succeed in maybe what they're trying to accomplish because there's not that space to be open about what you're thinking, the space to be open about concerns. So I really, as I've started to become more skilled, I think as a Scrum Master over the last 2, 3, 4 years, um, empathy and transparency and openness are core competencies that I really try to live foundationally, like in myself. And then what I found is that the teams will mature and follow the example that I set as I work with them over several months.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, I just remember learning about like Agile and going into that Scrum Master space myself and just really loving the humanness part of like agility. Like, where people were told what to do, even though you hire all these developers who have the expertise, like they're known to have the expertise, but then like somebody else who doesn't even probably know how to do their work comes and, tells them like how to do it or what to do and all that stuff. So I really, really embrace that humanness and like giving that empowerment. And people, when you ask the question, like, how would you solve it? What would you do in this case? It really gives people that that chance to like provide value and people feel like they're being valued at work, right? So yeah, no, I love that. One of the things that I truly believe on being an effective coach or a scrum master really is it's all about self mastery. Like, how have you evolved, right? So what would you say, how have you, Adam, like evolved as a scrum master, as a coach, in the maybe like recently or just like in 60 to 90 days?
Yeah, I think the skill set um, has had to change over the last 60 to 90 days. So when
Mm-hmm.
I started working with my current team, about 8 months ago, they were very dysfunctional.
Yeah.
They didn't have the ability to communicate with each other very well. So my strategy at that time was just was very basic. It was just trying
Mm,
to get them to coexist appropriately and respectfully, like in a team meeting. But now the that we made progress in the team dynamic and the team is starting to bond and the chemistry is there, now we can start to work a little bit more towards the more advanced agile techniques, which is cool.
mm, right.
Um, I one of the things, Petra, I think that's helped me not just survive as a Scrum Master, but thrive as a Scrum Master. And even when compared to like some of my peers that have had more experience in the industry in terms of years, is the dedication to self-development and personal growth outside of my 9 to 5. So my belief is that if a Scrum Master isn't reading books on communication and leadership and emotional intelligence outside of their 9 to 5, they're not going to be as effective during the day as they would be had they put more effort into that on the side. And I think, just some of the things that I've worked on, the last 30, 60, 90 days, my soft skills and the mentoring piece of being a Scrum Master have now been tested. Yeah. Whereas up front, you're more of just the conflict resolution person, setting up meetings and trying to put out fires. But now, as the team has started to mature and they've become respectful and they've learned how to be transparent and empathetic, and that chemistry is there, now I can be more hands-on with them one-on-one. And a really cool example, just maybe like a month ago that I had, was a developer that came to me and said, "Hey, Adam, I really want to help some of my peers on the team improve. And I'm working with them, we're doing screen shares, but I don't feel like they're really understanding what I'm telling them. I'm asking, do you understand? And they keep saying, yes, I understand. However, then they'll go back and make the same mistakes over and over again." And I said, well, just a suggestion, you can match it to your tone and your personality, but what I might recommend is changing the question. So instead of saying, do you understand, ask, what do you understand of what I've just told you? And that's such a small difference, but I think the way you phrase that question that's kind of the difference between a new leader or a good leader and an experienced leader and a great leader, is asking the right questions in the right moment versus just keeping things surface level.
Cool. One of the things that I've heard you talk about, just like raising transparency. And I mean, that's one of the, core things in Agile, Scrum, just like having that transparency. So how have you maybe created transparency with your team? Like, what are some things that you've done to create transparency?
Yeah, I think number one is I have to be the ultimate example of being transparent. So, and part of this, I think, is about not necessarily playing the bureaucratic political game in organizations. My personality and like my style with my teams is not to be this stubborn optimist.
Yeah.
Like if something is going wrong and it's on fire, like I'll empathize with that and I'll say, yeah, it's on fire. Like this is not a good situation to be in. Like I'm not the type to sit back and be like, oh, it's fine, we'll be fine, everything's fine. No, it's like, and the team sees that. And the team will read that on me. So my ability to be honest and say, yeah, this is not a good situation, it sucks, we're going to get through it, but like let's embrace it and like be okay. And just I like to level with them and be pretty honest about it. And being transparent about like my fears and my weaknesses too is kind of part of that. Because if I'm not transparent with them about what I'm thinking and like my weaknesses, apologizing is a big part of this, and owning up to a mistake is like, it shows a lot of humility, but then over time it sets the example for my team. And what's really cool now is that I'm seeing them do that for themselves, whereas they wouldn't do that like 6 months ago, but because I've done that with them for 6 months and set the example, now they're doing it. Additionally, I think a good coach, maybe even a great coach, will notice hesitancy in conversations and call that out. And I've had to do that over time. Now I don't necessarily have to do that as much because the team just trusts me and they're okay being vulnerable. But up front, I had to say, hey, I could be way off base, but I'm noticing like a little bit of hesitancy. I just want to let you know that this is a safe space. I'm not going to judge you for what you say, but for us to make progress, one-on-one here and as a team, I really just need you to give me like your honest thoughts about what's happening. Because if you don't, I can't help you appropriately. So I really need this to be like an open space to give honest thoughts with me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think the key takeaway there is one, like you got to show up where in a way you're okay to be vulnerable, right? And we talk about like leadership is about like leading from the front. It's not necessarily like you being it, you embracing it, you being in the trenches with the people, right? So, I mean, I think a lot of times a scrum master, or when you're a scrum master, it kind of almost seems like, oh, like you have all the answers, you're supposed to know everything, or you're not supposed to like fail, or like it looks bad if I'm failing or if I don't know the answer, right? uh like I love that you've been able to just say, hey, like I made a mistake, or like, hey, I don't know this, and not being able to like you not being afraid to fail, because then like that shows that it's okay for them to fail, like failure is accepted, right? Because like for most of us in like corporate world, like if you don't get something right, or if you break this small code, then like, am I losing a job today? Right?
Yeah.
And so I love that you allow your team to like see you as you, because we're all human and we all make mistakes, and end of the day, we're just trying to do the best we can with like what we know. So yeah.
Yeah. And every Scrum Master has a different style, right?
Yeah.
I mean, my style, whether it's a blessing or a curse, maybe both, is that I'm stubbornly rigid about not giving my team answers.
Mm,
At least not until we have a dialogue about it. Like
right.
the ultimate, outcome of a question might be that I give them the answer, but I want them to learn from the discussion first.
Yeah.
And I've butted heads with some leadership and management at times for being honest about, the fact that I have no idea. I have to
Yeah.
check with my team.
Right.
I have a team of experts that are in the code base. They're doing the testing. They know and a big thing, Petra, is that I have the ultimate trust in my team.
Mm.
I trust them to get the job done, and they don't always. Sometimes they fail,
Mm-hmm.
but then it's an amazing opportunity to like ask them to learn from the
Mm.
mistake. And I've never found that teams learn if they're being micromanaged and controlled. They
Yeah.
learn by finding their own way and making their own mistakes and then owning up to it, admitting that they made a mistake, and then moving forward after that.
Yeah, I mean, people, if it's their answer, people are most likely to follow it anyway, right? Because like a lot of times people ask for advice, but how many people actually really follow the advice unless like it comes from their mouth? And I think being a coach is it's about like facilitating some of those conversations, or asking certain questions where they come up with their own answer, so then like they're more likely to go and implement that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's about influence, right?
Mm-hmm.
A book that I had read years ago, How to Win Friends and Influence People, they talk about this idea of there being no neutral interaction every day.
Yeah.
Every
Right.
interaction from the first good morning to the last good night leaves someone else that you're interacted
Mm-hmm.
with a little bit better, a little bit worse. And I
Yeah.
think combining that with this idea of that the leader can't lead until the led give the leader permission to lead has
Mm.
allowed me more influence in my teams than maybe some of my peers that don't spend the time building those relationships and
Yeah.
asking for permission to lead. So again, something that it's a very subtle difference, but the team now has so much more respect for my opinions and um, my guidance, because I've given them the space to make their own mistakes, and told them that I support them and that I'm proud of them and that I trust them on the front end. And it's just a really cool relationship that now I'm finally starting to see the fruits of.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think like the next question that I was going to ask you, you kind of have already touched on a little bit, was just really about like how do you really build up or empower your teammates, right? I think one of the things that you said is like you let them figure out, because then like when it's their answer, when you put them as an expert, like you are a developer, like there's certain things like you come like you're the knowledge worker here, so really you're unlocking that out of them. I guess, do you have any other things that maybe you've done to build up and empower your team members?
Yeah, I think number one, I don't come from a development or like a technical background. So
Right.
again, whether it's a blessing or a curse, I don't know. But I've found that my teams as a whole are stronger than some of my peers because
Mm,
I don't have the ability to give them technical guidance. I've
Yeah.
studied, again, the nice part about personal growth and self-development is that you have the ability to ask good questions.
Mm-hmm.
So the questions that I ask get them to think, and I believe that thinking is probably the hardest work that there is, which is why so few people engage in it.
Yeah.
So my like just straight up humble inability to not give guidance on technical problems has allowed my teams the space and the ability to be more self-organizing and come up with solutions on their own because I'm not leading them there,
Yeah.
or leading them to the solution. I think the other part of that too is that the team needs to know that they're valued. So I'm a
Mm,
big fan of giving them words of affirmation when I see
yeah.
something awesome happening, right? If I see a developer coming off of a story that's going to give them story points to take a bug ticket for someone else because they're trying to be like give a selfless act of service, that
Mm-hmm.
to me is merit for saying, hey, like I noticed this. This
Mm,
is really selfless of you. Thank you so much for doing this. This is really awesome. And
yeah.
then when I'm seeing those things, giving them the one-on-one and the words of affirmation directly to them is also helpful. However, I've seen that my team can gain influence in the organization if I'm giving words of affirmation about them to leadership.
Mm,
So I have a young developer on my team, super talented, and I talk to him um, daily about like his journey and his leadership growth and what he wants to accomplish. And then I also gave words of affirmation about him to our CTO.
mm,
And I didn't see the results or the fruits of that for several months. But then the CEO or CTO was trying to make a decision for the team. And I had given that developer enough influence to go to the CTO and say, hey, I don't really agree with this. Can we adjust this?
mm.
Because I had given words of affirmation about that person to the CTO, I then gave that developer enough influence to go to that person and say, hey, I disagree. Can we work out
Wow.
something else? So
Yeah.
it's really subtle, but it's crazy how powerful the words "thank you," "I'm sorry," and "I'm proud of you," "I
Mm-hmm.
believe in you," and "I trust you" really are. Like,
Yeah.
as long as they're genuine and they're not overused. If you use them
Right.
appropriately and they're genuine, it's a pretty they're super powerful.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that because, I mean, one of the biggest challenges, like I do see in organization, is like developers, you know, even if a manager, like their direct manager is in the room, they're not able to share like so fully how they would want to share. So that's great that like a developer who's in a junior level was able to like have that conversation or just say, hey, like I don't think that's the right way to do it, or here's my thoughts or my ideas, like going to a CTO. So kudos to you. That's great.
Yeah, and I think one thing I've done well is I've always encouraged my team to speak up
Mm.
for good or bad. And a lot of times, actually most of the time, they'll ask me how to phrase something that they want to say because they respect the input, right? They're like, hey, you have a way with words, you
Yeah.
know how to be empathetic. Can I run this by you? But I always
Hmm.
encourage them to be transparent because what I don't want to have happen is something negative that kind of comes down the pipe and they didn't have the opportunity to like speak up and intercept that before it happened. Because then
Right.
then you get the feelings of regret and remorse. It's like, no, I would rather have you speak up and try than just sit back and take something that falls downhill.
Right. Yeah. Um, the next thing I wanted to kind of pivot into maybe some of the advices for like, other scrum masters out there in a way. Uh, no matter what team, where you go, what organization you go into, you're always going to have one or two challenging team members. I mean, every scrum master that I've talked to, come to me and say, there's just one person like, oh, like, that's kind of making my job a little bit harder. And which is, normal. Like there's going to be resistance. There's, people that don't want to change and things like that. So, um, have you had a difficult team member? And if so, like, how have you handled things when there is a difficult team member?
Yeah, there's a lot of nuances within that. I think the reality is I know that I can't mentor everyone equally.
Mm, right.
And what I've found is that influence between members of a team is going to be greater than my influence coming from like a management or a leadership perspective. So
Mm,
even though I might not be able to mentor someone directly for whatever reason, they're very talented and they don't value my opinion. Maybe they have too big of an ego. maybe they're just not willing to be vulnerable, whatever the reason is. I truly believe that I can't physically and mentally mentor every single person because they just won't allow me the space to do that.
Yeah.
But if you find the most mentorable people on a team and mentor them, teach them how to communicate, teach them how to collaborate, and give them the tools, I've found that sometimes they'll have a greater level of influence with their peers versus me coming one-on-one. Now, for someone that just like isn't self-aware enough to understand or even be open to that, it's really difficult. And I've had the spectrum. I've had, you know, developers with really big egos that over time will let their guard down and will start asking for feedback and be more self-aware, which is super cool to see. But some of them don't. Some of them just don't care. They don't want to improve, and that's unfortunate. But I believe that, again, you mentor the ones that you can, and then hopefully indirectly your mentorship comes through with the other members of the team that maybe you can't physically mentor directly.
Yeah, for sure. I guess follow up on that, like, do you have any team members or just like that one person, maybe like, you know, you're just facilitating different events, different meetings, that just talks a little bit too much or just doesn't let other people share their opinion? Like, how do you handle that? What do you do?
I think my preference is that I'd rather have a team that over communicates than under communicates. Because again, just my own experience, right? I can't speak to people that, you know, have had different experiences. I'm just speaking from the heart on this, but I feel like I can mold a team that over communicates.
Right.
And if they're at least at a minimum willing, even if it's a little bit brash and rough around the edges, if they're willing to speak their mind, I have enough faith in my own abilities to build relationships where I can start to mold that into respect and chemistry. Versus trying to get a team that doesn't communicate at all and is very introverted and doesn't feel comfortable speaking up for whatever reason. I think that's harder for me to kind of elicit that. But I think also, like, you just have to use some facilitation at base, right? So one technique that I like to use is this rule of 4. That after you speak, it's just a working agreement, right? So I set the tone in the beginning of the meeting. I say, hey, like, let's try a facilitation technique. You know, after you speak, 4 other people have to speak before you can speak again, right? And that's, I honestly don't like doing that because that's really granular. I'd rather use something a little more subtle versus like something, you know, more aggressive like that. But I've had good results with it. And over time, the goal isn't to keep that in place. It's just to show someone that they're sharing a little bit too much or too often. And then over time, like, we can pull back and be a little bit more light on the facilitation. I think over time, the transition of being a facilitator isn't to facilitate aggressively indefinitely. You might have to be there as a leader, and there's a little bit of an art within that of knowing when to speak and when not to speak. But if a team is struggling and they're not communicating well, I don't think that it's effective to just sit back and let them struggle. and it's part of that just is like about recognizing where they're at and what they need in that moment, and then helping them, you know, work through that situation in a little bit of a case-by-case basis.
No, I like that. And I mean, you kind of answered the next question that I was actually going to ask you in that anyway. But any other tips or any other like key points that you want to share as far as like being an effective facilitator? Any other things that you got under your belt?
Yeah, I think the art of communication isn't just saying the right thing at the right time, but it's also about not saying the wrong thing in a tempting moment. And as a facilitator and especially as a Scrum Master and an Agile coach, learning the art of when to speak and when not to speak isn't an overnight process.
Right.
And I think some of the breakthrough moments that I've had as a facilitator have been within those like 5 to 10 seconds of awkward silence. Because it's you, I mean, you know, like, if you've been you know, in those roles, and I know you've shared with me on this stuff in the past, it's like those 5 to 10 seconds are painful. They're super painful. Nobody likes awkward silence, but it's super ironic that after those 10 seconds, someone speaks up.
Yeah.
And then normally it's something that actually does add a lot of value. So I think a new facilitator will probably feel the need to jump in and facilitate, but an experienced facilitator will be able to read that and say, I'm gonna hold back and then see what happens. And touching back on your question of like, what's the learning the last 30 to 90 days, my teams now, the team specifically that I'm working with, finally is able to communicate without my efforts, mostly. So retros, grooming events, backlog refinement sessions, I spent 4 to 6 months pretty aggressively facilitating and giving them the tools to learn how to collaborate. Now it's the art of stepping back and allowing them the space to facilitate themselves, and they've been doing incredibly.
Right.
But
so
I couldn't do that the first month or two.
Right. Do you just like sometimes just let them like facilitate stand-ups or different things? Like, have you started to do that? Okay.
Yeah. So part of being a Scrum Master is having some charisma and like telling jokes and keeping like the light atmosphere. So like one thing I've done recently is in stand-ups, I'll say, hey, thank you for volunteering to facilitate the stand-up today. And of course they hadn't said anything. And then they bring up the board and they walk through it. And it's a really cool opportunity to like let the team communicate with each other without having me be there.
Yeah.
Or like be facilitating actively. However, I definitely couldn't do that the first 3, 4, 5 months.
Right.
Like I had to build those relationships. I had to be charismatic and set the tone and like lead by example for a little while. But now that I have those fun, light relationships built and the team is getting some chemistry, I can mess around with them like that. And it's kind of a cool little way to lighten the air in some of those more redundant stand-ups. And in retrospectives too, I think I still have to be a facilitator and set the tone on the form of the retro.
Yeah.
Right. You have to give them the board, you have to give them the topics and kind of set the tone. I learned about a power start, which is a technique to start meetings. And I think like using that is cool and it helps. But then in the retro, my goal is to speak as little as possible. And we've had 2 of our best retros yet in 8 months, the last 2 weeks, and or the last 4 weeks, and I haven't hardly had to talk at all. They're taking their own action items. They're talking about what they want to do next sprint. They're talking about what went well and what didn't and what they want to adjust. So it's cool. I'm like kind of shedding a hypothetical tear here. I'm like so proud of them. But it took a long time. The message is like, it's not going to happen overnight. You need to know when to be a facilitator and when to be a passive observer, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I like that. That's awesome. Kind of want to talk a little bit about coaching. I believe, coaching does start with you as an individual person, but it's never really about you, right? So as you are growing in your Agile journey, what are you doing to become a better coach or mentor to your team and your organization?
I think part of it is having the courage to have a crucial conversation. Because my one of my weaknesses, I think, just naturally is that I don't like conflict. So reading crucial conversations helped, and I think that's kind of molded my views on it. But also, like setting up a conflict resolution meeting or dealing with that is not like a natural strength. I've had to work on that. But I think over time, as I've grown and as a coach, is knowing how to work with each individual person in a very specific way, because the way that I coach and mentor one person might not be the way I mentor and coach someone else. And getting, I think part of that too, like foundationally, you have to have an individual relationship with everyone on your team. Like I ask them questions about their family. I know what they like to eat. I know what they like to do in their spare time. I put a lot of effort and I invest a lot of time into getting to know them and showing them that I actually care about them as human beings. And learning that about them and asking them questions about, how do they like to be communicated with? What are some of their pet peeves? And then kind of the combination of their answers and their mannerisms in meetings and one-on-ones allows me kind of that space to get to know them on a deeper level. And then I tailor the mentoring and coaching around that. One person on the team might value a lot more direct communication, whereas someone else in the team might want empathetic communication.
Yeah.
Another person on the team might come to me just to vent about things and they don't want input. And I need to read that, because if I try to give them mentorship or coaching when they're not ready for it or where they don't ask for it, I don't think that builds a relationship. I think that puts distance between the mentor and the mentee. So
Right.
knowing and recognizing it when and if someone is even ready and willing to be mentored is, again, a little bit of a skill that I've definitely paid attention to the last 2 or 3 months, but it's been on my mind for several years.
Yeah. No, that's great. What advice would you have for someone who is maybe a new Scrum Master and going into their first Scrum Master role? Maybe just kind of looking back at even like your recent role or, previous roles, like, here's kind of what I did the first 60 days, 90 days, or first month that helped me become a good Scrum Master.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the motto. I might have mentioned this earlier, but people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
So be patient. Don't be afraid to take a step back and really understand where the team is at and what they need. On my mind pretty consistently that I try to reflect on is, well, what does the team need from me right now?
Yeah.
What is the biggest thing holding them back? Maybe they have super strong product owners and there's good communication between the product owners and the dev team, but maybe there's a breakdown of a dependency 2 teams over that's slowing us
Right.
down, right? How can I fix that problem? And I think be patient with yourself or with themselves, right?
Yeah.
And then
It's
lastly, I
needed.
think, I think part of it is too, just like spend the time to develop yourself outside of your career. Because again, I think that's one of the things that I focused a lot on, and it's helped me thrive in the 9 to 5 role versus some of the peers that maybe haven't thrived as much, is my dedication to actually growing myself and being a better person outside of like the 9 to 5 hours.
Yeah. Are there maybe like, do you have a good, like, 3 to 4 books maybe that you've read that has helped you become a good Scrum Master or a coach?
Yeah, I think one of my favorites is How to Earn Friends and Influence People in the Digital Age by Dale
Mm-hmm.
Carnegie. I think that's just a good um, it's a good interpersonal book just in general. And I
Yeah.
think whether you're dealing with like management and leadership or a peer, another Scrum Master, you're dealing with your team, it's going to give you a lot of the skills. It's going to give anyone the skills to have more success in interpersonal relations. I think
Mm-hmm.
more on like the Agile side, Coaching Agile Teams by Lisa Adkins is an incredible book. It's full of
It is.
content.
Yeah.
My book is marked up with highlighters and notes and underlines and brackets. So working through that, I think, will give a lot of tools as well. Crucial Conversations is a really good
Mm,
addition to any library, just to
it is. Yeah.
have some tools in your back pocket of how to have difficult conversations.
Mhm.
Because I think as a leader, that's a good portion of the day, is having difficult conversations with people.
Yeah. Yeah. Another good book that I've found is Retrospectives by I believe something Darby. I'll have to put that link out there, but they go through like the different stages of retrospective, like the 5 stages, and the whole book is just on retrospective and how to like facilitate it like a kick-ass retrospective. So that's another good one to add to the list. Cool. Maybe we can talk about just a little bit more on like, what do you feel like are some of your strengths and weaknesses as a Scrum Master?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the ultimate strength, the superpower, so to speak, is just building an incredibly strong relationship with each member of the team.
Mm,
Whereas some of my teams have shared, some pretty even traumatic events like in their past that they wouldn't tell anybody. And I think that uh, knowing that they're willing to be that vulnerable with me is a really huge compliment. Um,
yeah.
But then when they open up, it's the reaction that is pretty powerful too, because I have to like be empathetic and sympathetic and intentionally think about what I say back.
Yeah, it seems
So
like you've really created that environment or really that space that we talk about, creating that, safe space for people, right? Like you've built a relationship, but also you've created that space. You know how to hold space for people, and they can trust you and they can come to you for whatever situations there might be, seems like.
yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot of ways to do that. I mean, I asked my team, like, what do you think?
Yeah.
What do you think is the best option? I mean,
Yeah.
and I think that's subtle, right? And then if they come to me with an idea, instead of trying to negotiate them out of it, even if it's maybe like not what my preference would be, just having the trust to say, I believe in you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Try it. Like, I
Yeah.
believe in your judgment. I trust your judgment. Like, go for it and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think a subtle thing that some people might not catch on to as a Scrum Master is focusing on finding out what they want to do and helping them get it done. So if they want to learn a specific type of code or a specific language, or they want to move up, or they want to have career growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Focusing on helping them get that done, I feel like is a
Mm.
lot more effective strategy than trying to tell someone to do what they don't want to do. And it's like subtle, but
Yeah.
it's pretty powerful. So finding out like what they want to learn and helping them get it done has allowed, again, one of those intangibles that I've used to gain influence in the team and build a relationship. And then over time, as that relationship is mutual, it's very much back and forth on like a peer-to-peer level. So I think like the peer-to-peer relationship is what I've developed more so than like management to employee. And they've
Mm.
told me that. I mean, as I've developed the relationships, they've told me, my team has told me, many times that we don't think of you as a leader. We think of you as a peer that we have a lot of respect for.
Mm.
So it's kind of a cool dynamic to develop.
Yeah. One of the things that I, I encounter, or like I hear a lot of Scrum Masters out there, it's like, or even teams, like whenever, like I went to an organization where the idea of retrospectives, like people cringed, like, oh, another retro. Like, I don't want to go to another retro. Um, and over time, like I've learned there are so many cool ways to like make those fun, engaging, where people actually want to come. And I know earlier you talked about like you've had some very successful retros, maybe like last couple, where you don't even do anything at this point, or you're just more of an observer and people just have your team just kind of runs a show on their own. I guess like what are some things that you did to get to that level maybe, or what have you done to really make sure retros are fun, engaging, and effective? Because you can have a retrospective and you can have, you can talk about a few things, but like I've also like have had teams that just talks about things, but then there's really not anything concrete that they can take back and like implement to get better, right? Because there's also like an art on facilitating and making it effective, that they do take out the action item and they know what they need to improve on and actually implement that. So like maybe just talk about what have you done?
Yeah, I think retrospectives are such a journey. Um, and I think maybe one thing that I've done that's worked fairly well is just understanding what the pulse of the team is like in the moment.
Mm.
Right. I mean, is a traditional retro even the right decision? Are they
Right.
even in the frame of mind to like go through a retro?
Mm.
And maybe they're not, and that's okay. Like I've done a lot of different types of retros that weren't even retros.
Yeah.
Like if they've just had an amazing sprint and they've
Yeah.
delivered and they feel good about it, and they set a new record for velocity, or they had some breakthrough as a team. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily want to go into a retro and talk about all the things that they need to improve. Like,
Mm.
so I've had that happen, and I've done a celebration retro
There you
where we
go.
just talk about all the amazing things that we did the last 2 weeks.
Mm.
We've done affirmation retros where I'll have everyone on a list, and then everyone on the team has to give a positive affirmation to someone else on the team.
All right.
And then we read those and we go through those, and it's a really cool way for the team to bond. But over time, like the goal is to turn them more into like the inspect and adapt ceremonies that they're supposed to be. So looking back now, the patience I had in the retros up front by saying, okay, maybe this isn't the right decision yet. Like, let's wait. Let's do a celebration retro. Let's give the team. Sometimes I think the team just needs to have space to vent and talk about what went wrong. And like, what was kind of like ironic is that some of the earlier retros were the best communication and collaboration the team had ever done. Like they were so mad at the organization that they finally dropped their walls and they were just like, we're talking to each other about what went wrong. And they weren't blaming each other, but there was just like a good vent session to get everything out in the open. So, I mean, it didn't make me super thrilled at the time to like see that, but over time, as the team chemistry grew, the dynamic improved, and I experimented with different retro formats and different topics and different, ways to go about having like a fun retro that's still productive. The team started to mature. And now that we've like gone through some of that crap in the past, we can have good retros. I don't have to facilitate so much, and they can just kind of lead it. And now that they like have some confidence in themselves, they're more open to like making some adjustments because they're not so focused on just doing damage control.
Right. Yeah. And I think to add to your note, I mean, a lot of times people just like look at it, like a lot of Scrum Masters I've seen, just maybe look at it as like another meeting. And, depending on where your team is at, it's really not just another meeting. I believe like if you're conducting an hour retro, like you should spend probably like 2 hours prepping for that. And a lot of times if you're not doing that, then it's like a same retro over and over again. It's like, what went well? What didn't go well? Like, how can we be better, right? It's the same format over and over again. Because, I mean, I remember like just spending a couple of hours just, hey, like, what can I do? Like, does my team, like, do they need a little bit more of an energizer? Like, are they at a point where they're maybe not, maybe more they're not collaborating as much, or I don't see that team spirit. So do we need to do like a team building activity? Should we just like go out, like obviously when it was in person, should we go out and get some coffee and just sit at a coffee table and like just chat, right? So I think the idea behind it is like, can you spend some time? Can you become creative? Can you implement something new? Can you experiment? Can you try some of the stuff that you talked about, right? Like really feeling the pulse. Like if a team is doing great and like they delivered well and the sprint went great, like, yeah, no need to sit there and talk about like what can they do better. Like go and celebrate, like have lunch or like have whatever, have some drinks. I don't know, whatever they need. So I think that's great.
Yeah, and that's not to say that you can't do a retrospective on the retrospective.
Right.
I've heard some people in the past do that. And it's cool to see like how when you actually do a retro on the retro, what feedback comes to how to improve it.
Yeah. Well, cool. This was a very fun convo. Looks like the camera battery is about to die. Also, I'm getting a getting a notification there. But yeah, thank you so much for coming out, Adam. I had a blast chatting with you, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to get impacted just by listening to this podcast. Any last moment or last minute things? Any last tips that you want to share before this camera really dies?
No, I think just the biggest takeaway is be a learner, have a learner spirit, be humble, stay humble. You never know it all, and stay involved in like agile communities because someone's going to have a good idea that you haven't come up with before. And I think the best agilists really do a pretty intentional job and do a great job of networking and taking those ideas from other people and implementing in their own perspectives.
Yeah, no, that's a great advice. All right, thanks so much.
Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. We'll be sure to come back with more exciting videos on Agile topics.